Hello, we are Team One. I'm Derek Arnold.
I'm Margo Sorrell.
I'm Scott Zendarski.
And today we'll be talking about DTE Electric balancing stakeholder interests. To be a little bit more specific, we'll be discussing what considerations DTE must make in order to diversify its generation while keeping customer rates affordable and environmentally supportive. Many of you may not know this, but DTE Electric has a fleet of old coal plants that generate the majority of its electricity, and coal is not seen as environmentally friendly, but it is cheap, and we'll go into a little bit more detail in a few slides. So why is balancing stakeholder interest important to DTE Electric? For one, there's a risk of disallowances, so if the company acts unreasonably or imprudently, the MPSC can disallow the recovery of those expenses, and the company would have to eat that. The second bullet is to maintain customer satisfaction. So if customers are unsatisfied with their service, they can put pressure on the MPSC and the government, and it can lead back to the first bullet of disallowances. And the third bullet is to avoid lawsuits. In recent years, the DTE Electric has been in several lawsuits involving its coal power plants, and that has come as a significant expense to the company. And all these factors can lead to uncertain future value. It can affect things like stock price. It can affect the company's credit rating, its cost of borrowing, and impact the company's operations. Before we get into the specifics, here's some background on DTE Electric. It services 2.1 million customers in Southeast Michigan. Its fleet includes a variety of units that use different fuels. And in 2013, over 74% of its electricity was generated by coal. Looking closer at its coal fleet, many of the units are over 60 years old. When they were originally designed, the expectation was these units would operate for 30-40 years, and DTE Electric has continued to operate these units, many of them without installing the best available control technology to limit hazardous emissions. What are hazardous pollutants? These are byproducts of combusting coal. These are emissions that can cause serious health effects, including cancer, birth defects, and heart attacks. And under the Clean Air Act, the EPA is responsible for setting national ambient air quality standards, and the states are responsible for meeting those standards. And in those standards includes particulate matter, NOx, and SO2 emissions from power plants. So why is coal seen as a dirty fuel? Well, you can see from this slide that coal contains sulfur, it contains ash, it contains mercury. Compared to natural gas, it leads to higher NOx emissions and higher CO2 emissions. So why not just burn natural gas instead of coal? Well, you can see from this chart that the price of natural gas has been considerably above that of coal for the last 10 to 15 years. And you might say, well, what about wind and solar? Those are both have free fuel, and they have two basic problems. One is the reliability of the generation. When the wind stops blowing and the sun stops shining, you need resources to pick up that drop in generation. The other issue with them is they cost a lot of capital to build. So based on a levelized cost, if you were to build something today, you'd probably build a combined cycle unit. Transitioning to the stakeholder analysis, in order to balance stakeholder interests, we first have to know how they'll be impacted by the company's decisions. So in this chart, you can see for DTE Electric customers, as the company transitions out of coal, it's likely that customers will see higher rates. They could see increased risk of power shortages, and on the positive side, they'll see lower air, land, and water pollution. Looking at the company's employees, the workforce will likely be leaner going forward, and that is because coal plants require more resources to maintain and operate. In addition to that, there will likely be new trades needed for things like wind, solar, and combined cycles. Looking at the stockholders, there's a greater risk of lower returns if expenses are disallowed, as previously discussed. And for DTE Energy creditors, because the company is going to have to borrow more for new construction and to invest in new technology, there's going to be a higher risk of default. And looking at the suppliers, some of the older services will no longer be needed that were specifically for coal power plants. such as cleaning crews. But on the plus side, there will be new services needed, maybe maintenance of wind turbines or monitoring of wind turbines and solar farms and combined cycles. And for the non-shareholders, for the communities, there will likely be less residents employed for reasons already discussed, and there will be lower air, land, and water pollution once again. For the NGOs, they'll likely continue to lobby for cleaner energy and continue to publicize violations from the polluting power plants. For the media, there will be more stories to cover, both for the NGOs and for DTE Electric. That would include impacts on all stakeholders. For business support, there will be opportunity to bring in outside experts to help the company develop an integrated resource plan. For the local governments, some of the communities may lose its tax base when these plants retire. As part of the retirements, we will see environmental improvements, and the final point there is the MPSC will be approving the company's actions going forward. In terms of competitors, there will be pressure to expand the choice program to greater than 10%, and we'll go into that into more detail in a minute. And there could be an opportunity for the company to share assets with another company like it does already with its Ludington power plant. Later on, we'll discuss the strategies that moderate the negative impact on the stakeholders. But in the meantime, Bargov will take us through the environmental analysis.
Thanks, Derek. The environmental analysis include a few factors that need to be considered to help identify the external issues and threats. It will give a better idea of the various aspects that DTE should take into account to develop strategy to reduce these threats as well as take advantage of new opportunities. The environmental factors that influence the decisions include geophysical, legal, political, social, technological, economic, competitor, and customer. The geophysical environment for DTE includes the location of power plants, coal and nuclear, its research and development center, the substations, transmission lines, and the local distribution centers, all of which are located in the Detroit metro area. The location of the power plants or the distribution centers are no threat to the community or the environment. However, if DTE considers the development of renewable energy such as solar or wind, vast areas of land will be needed to develop solar and wind farms. At this point, the projects will reduce vegetation. DTE will now need to make a decision whether it is making or breaking impact to the effect of global warming. The legal factors include understanding of the intellectual properties involved during the development of clean energy technologies. In addition, the company should also be able to register its own invention disclosures or intellectual properties in the United States Patent and Trademark Office, also known as the USPTO, to take ownership of any work that is deemed as new invention or has led to the creation of new technology. For example, the company's development of solar farms could lead to the invention of more efficient solar panels. That is a composition which has never been discovered or has intellectual properties on it. In this case, the company should be able to file a patent in the USPTO. The political factors include the development of renewable energy by working with several political offices such as the federal, state, and the local governments. In addition, the company will have to work with other countries from which it is seeking the import of technology if it is not available domestically, or if the technology is deemed very sensitive. Basically, the company will have to work with Michigan governments or the federal government in signing deals that will import these technology. The social factors have several cultural patterns, values, beliefs, or conflicts among the people before selecting an area for the new development. The company basically needs to understand the sentiments of the public, provide employment or opportunities to local public. The technological factor includes the development of renewable energy itself, which itself is a new technology for the company. As we talked about in the stakeholder analysis in the slides previously, each of the stakeholders have an interest in the project since it benefits them. And also the other stakeholders can provide guidance for development. The economic factor, this is where the company has to make vital decisions whether it wants to enter the business or not. It needs to make a decision matrix that involves several cost-related factors and understand how it impacts or benefits the company. First of all, the company has to invest heavily in this new idea. The company may have to make capital budgeting decisions, which would include purchasing new equipment and land. Massive infrastructure such as utilities, that includes energy lines, internet, or buildings for housing employees or research and development employees, operations, administration, technological labs, etc., may all need to be considered. The company would then have to weigh in the cash flows that it expects to generate in future years and calculate its net present value. It has to understand the cost per unit that would be available to the end user, and if it would sustain in both ways, the cost per unit to the customer and the cost per unit to the company. On the other hand, the company may also have to relocate a few hundreds or thousands of employees depending upon the expertise available in the area where it's moving. The competitive factor includes competition such as Consumers Energy, which is the second largest energy firm in Michigan. If DT does not take this business opportunity, there is a possibility that Consumers Energy may want to look into it and invest into it and be the forefront um, monopoly that provides renewable energy at lower cost to consumers. The customer, for the customer, the cost per unit is what matters at the end of the day. Many customers cannot afford existing cost because they think it's too high. Uh, for customers, the cost has to remain either better or or they have to remain the same at least. So how are these coalitions likely to form? The coalitions are likely to form between environmental groups, NGOs, communities impacted by pollution, and possibly new technologies. These coalitions will basically lobby for the for accelerated retirements of polluting coal-fired power plants and new build made up of renewable and efficient natural gas-fired units. Additionally, these groups may file lawsuits involving environmental violations and promote media coverage that sensationalizes DT Energy's shortcoming. Now, Scott will discuss in more detail regarding management plan.
Thank you, and now we're going to focus on the management section of the presentation. The focus that we have for DT is to make sure that we have reliable resources here to support the shortages of electricity. Right now there's a projected 3 gigawatt shortage in 2016. That's only a possibility based on the data, but it's still something that we need to keep in mind. DT has already started a retirement process of the coal-fired power plants to address some environmental concerns. As you may notice in some of the news articles, they have been had Clean Air Act lawsuits brought against them, which we're trying to work on. The next thing is the construction and the lead time of natural gas facilities. These take about 6 years to complete, so really this is only a long-term solution. It doesn't really help in the short term. So the main focus needs to be to optimize the infrastructure that they currently have while working to increase capacity of other resources. The roadblocks that we see for DTE is in 2008 energy law that was passed. It was Public Act 286, which allowed a 10% cap, allowing companies to seek alternative sources for power to purchase from people other than DTE, who's the largest, and consumers, who's the second largest. The issue that we ran into is many of the companies more companies opted out than expected, which caused a strain on DTE. So, of course, when we do large investments for new natural gas facilities, the shareholders need to be taken into account, as this could affect profits, as well as the consumers, as any kind of large capital investment could increase the prices for the consumers. Opportunities that we have is, based on the current issues of shortage of power, we could lobby for free land, tax credits, and other incentives to reduce total investments. Thus that also helps the shareholders with increasing some profits, and the consumers without having to pass on the high prices of capital amortization onto them. Another benefit that we have is by building the new natural gas facilities, this is also stimulation of indirectly into the job market of the local economy for new infrastructure. So if we build facilities either existing where the coal burning ones are being replaced, or at new facilities, you have electricians, millwrights, outside contractors, and other people in the economy which will be able to find jobs. Long term for DTE, the focus should also be on renewable energy, not just natural gas. The University of Michigan has a study which shows that for only $2.80 per household, renewable energy could be up to 25% of the power generated by 2025. So that's something for us to keep in mind. Also long term, we need to retire the balance of the coal power plants. The new natural gas power plants are a lot more efficient, so that will be able to drive down some costs, but it also has a risk as natural gas prices are a lot more volatile than what we have for coal burning, so we need to make sure that we keep our eyes on that as well. Going on to the stakeholders impact chart, I won't cover all of these, but I'll just cover some of the top ones. We need to phase in the capital. Obviously, we can't go out and spend an excessive amount of money all at once, so we need to be smart with our investments and smart with our money of how we phase in the new energy efficient systems. And we also need to include contract labor and materials for providers in construction and maintenance for the new power plants, for some of the old services that are no longer needed, or new services needed, to make sure that we balance that out. Another item that we need to look at is just the overall publicity of the item. Installing natural gas and moving to other different sources other than the burning coal is something that we need to make sure is public and create good publicity for the company and make good information just for the overall community to know that DTE is taking a stand to move forward with more environmentally friendly power sources. Another item to look at is for the old power plants that we have is, do we want to build facilities on top of those facilities already, since we are able to then reuse the land that we already have, or do we want to look at new resources? So that's some things we need to look at of how the tax bases are structured in the cities and what makes the most sense to be beneficial to our company. Overall, I think the plan that the team has laid out is beneficial for the stakeholders, as that's something that we need to focus on for DTE, but we also need to take into account the consumer.